So, man, yeah, things at Rite Aid have been a little bit interesting for me, man.
Why is that?
Because I just feel like someone's got it out for me. They're planting stories, like, throughout the store. Whoever it is, I wish they would cut it out quick. But when they will, I can only guess, man.
Well, so what you're saying is things haven't been going too great.
Yeah,
Just blame it on a simple twist of fate.
And welcome back, everybody.
I was ready this time.
No, I can no longer blindside you. It's going to be very hard to do a blindside whenever we're doing a live episode because you can feel it coming.
Yeah, well, it's also the fact that you've done it for the past 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, let's see next time we do a video call. I bet I can blindside you. Anyways, I know this made riveting content for the listeners out there. Welcome back, everybody, to the best music podcast on this side of the Mississippi, hosted by two dashingly good-looking men who share the same middle name. It is called Hey Listen to This. I am the one, the only, the undisputed Ryan James Kearns.
And I am the one, the only, the ready this week, Matt Durzik.
And what we do here, if this is your first time tuning into our podcast, first of all, welcome. Second of all, what we do is basically we take turns every week picking albums to dissect track by track. We can go as thorough as we want, as if those of you who have checked out our Wilco episode, you can see me dissecting the opening track of that album. I am trying to break your heart. I think I spent 20 minutes dissecting
something like that.
Yeah.
It feels like there's been a few tracks like that recently where we've kind of gone down the path. Like last week, our Surfer Rose episode discussing the Pixies, that's a 33-minute album, and the review that we did, the episode we did, is almost an hour and a half long.
Yeah. We tend to get lost in the weeds, and I feel like that's kind of the beauty about what we do here, because we can talk about the track as plain as day, or we could be hey, this is the impact that the track kind of had. Yeah. So
I do want to say, as a random aside, I want a diehard listener, or at the very least maybe myself, try to see how many times during the course of our shows have we talked about a song for longer than the actual song itself.
Oh.
Because I feel like everything last week probably falls in that category.
Yeah. Well, this week it should be
I don't see that happening too much this week.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So, for those of you who were keeping track, last week we talked about Surfer Rosa by the Pixies. That was in honor of Steve Albini's departure from the world. And this week, it was Matt's turn to pick. Matt, what are we talking about this week?
We are talking about an album from 1975, not by the 1975, but rather by one Bob Dylan, called Blood on the Tracks.
What if the 1975 did do a cover tribute album to this album here?
Good question.
Anyways, moving on.
Oh, jeez. But no, it is considered by many to be the last great Dylan masterpiece. It's 10 tracks long, and it comes at a time in which Dylan seemed to be... The 70s, at least the start of the 70s, weren't super kind to Bob Dylan, and for many reasons, he wasn't super kind to himself. He started the decade by releasing what many consider to be one of the worst albums of all time in Self-Portrait. Followed it up with New Morning, but then just kind of meandered throughout the remainder of the first half of the decade. Released his second greatest hit CD. Made his acting debut in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. He switched labels from Columbia to Asylum back to Columbia. And all in all, he was just kind of making music that, while some may have found it interesting, in another way, people were like, Bob Dylan, a bit of more of a 60s thing than anything else.
Yeah.
And this album really changed that because, well, we'll get into it.
Yeah. So yeah, that I was able to pick up on at least somewhat of the timeline when I was doing my research. I knew that this album was, I don't want to say a return to form, but it was almost like people refocusing in on Dylan after kind of like, a little bit of like some clunkers that were out there. So, yeah, before we dive into the album, I'm just going to do a brief rundown of my experience with Bob Dylan. Highway 61 Revisited.
Yep.
That was the first album that I got into with Bob Dylan. Know about like, his big albums like the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, and the Basement Tapes was another collection of music that I got into from him. I knew that's not exclusively Bob Dylan, that's with the band as well.
Right.
Also, if you want to hear us talk about like the band, we also recorded an episode on the band.
We did that too. Yeah.
So bringing everything full circle here. But yeah, overall, like I always have appreciated what Bob Dylan does bring to the table. I know that he often gets criticized for his vocals, which, I mean, we'll go into with this album here. But, yeah. I was also familiar with Blood on the Tracks. Blonde on Blonde is another album that I'm familiar with. Not as thorough as, like, after, like, dissecting Blood on the Tracks. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the only Bob Dylan record that I own on vinyl is Nashville Skyline.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's my brief rundown of my history of Bob Dylan before this episode.
Mine's pretty similar. I kind of got into him because, like, I remember reading years ago when it first came out, the first iteration of it, the top 500 songs of all time by Rolling Stone. Like a Rolling Stone was right at the top at number 1, and he had some other songs in that top 100, including one we're going to be talking about very soon. And it just made me, start listening to Dylan. Then I got into basically the same albums you said, Highway 61 Revisited, Blonde on Blonde. This one didn't come until much later, but I do remember hearing it for the first time and thinking, wow, this is some good stuff. Spoiler alert. So, yeah, and I understand that his singing isn't necessarily the most singiest, but at the same time, that's what made him appealing to a lot of rock critics and a lot of rock fans, is that, he basically could make his, voice sort of turn and twist as it need be, and if the words are there, then it makes for a compelling song anyway.
Yeah. And it almost kind of following along the themes of like, hey, like, he doesn't have the best voice. It kind of reminds me of like what draws people to Bruce Springsteen and his vocals.
Yeah.
So even though I'm not a fan of his vocals, like, it's not for everyone, and I mean, you can respect that. So if you are tuning into this episode and you're like, I don't like Bob Dylan's vocals, cool. Thank you for the listen.
We both were at the same time. Like, thank you. You may leave now.
But yeah, without I think I'm ready to get at her, man.
I'm ready too. So let's start with the lead track and what would end up being the lead single from this album, "Tangled Up in Blue."
So, what a great track, man, to open everything up. Like, when I spun this on my detailed listening, one thing that I noticed, and I'm going to talk about throughout like the whole album discussion here, is everything is so perfectly produced. Like, I don't know who was the engineer behind the deck here, and Matt, for those of you who are not tuning into our live feed, Matt is, looking it up right now.
Power of the internet.
But everything's so crisp, and I mean, you hear like, the main focus is on Dylan's vocals and his lyrics, which should be the case. And I mean, you hear the acoustic guitar strumming, like, that's leading everything along. And also, if you focus in a little bit more, you can hear like the bass and the drums behind everything. But everything's mixed so perfectly well. And with this song here, we get the one of the many strengths of Dylan as a whole, which is his storytelling ability. And like, you really like a lot of the lot of the lore behind this album is the fact that Dylan was going through a divorce at the time of the like production of this album. So like a song like this where he's talking about like being tangled up in blue and like seeing like how a relationship is broken apart and how like you feel like you have to get back to her somehow, like it really captures the mindset of what Dylan was going through at the time, if you want to believe in the lore.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on it, and then breakup and dealing with the perils of divorce definitely were on Dylan's mind. They reflect strongly in the writing of this song. By the way, to answer your question, the engineers on this album were Philip Rabinowitz and Paul Martinson, co-produced by Bob Dylan himself along with Phil Ramone.
Okay.
So that's where that is, but I agree wholeheartedly. Everything sounds perfect as far as the execution is concerned. And the one thing that got me right away about this track, and I know we've talked about it a little bit in our intro, Dylan's singing is better than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Because what this song is, and I'll say it right now, this is not in my top 3 on the album, but I completely understand why people love this song, and I understand why it's gotten so much critical acclaim. It basically feels like a marriage between the two sides of Dylan that kind of have summarized his career up to this point. Because in the beginning you had, sort of the folky, I'm going to sing all my way through this entire album version of Dylan. And then following his car crash in 1967 with more refined work such as The Entirety of Nashville Skyline or a song like Knocking on Heaven's Door, he became more refined and definitely worked on his singing, and it definitely got better. But this feels like a marriage between folky Dylan and post-crash Dylan. And he's definitely got a lot of passion in his voice, but at the same time, he's not so wild that he's not out of tune or straying so far away from the track.
So yeah, that was one thing that again I'm gonna bring up through several points throughout this album, but like what really stood out to me was the passion behind Dylan's vocals. Like, one area that I'm going to highlight in this track here is in verse 7, where, like, we get the state of mind that Dylan's currently in, where he's, like, resolving to get back to this lover somehow. And when he's talking about, like, keep on keeping on, and he's still on the road, like, you really feel that here. One other thing that I like about this track here is just how it's structured, where like you get him waking up in the morning, talking about like how the relationship originally started, how it broke apart. And then in verses 4, 5, and 6, you almost get the sense like they meet later on in life. How he's talking about she studied the lines on my face. Like, I feel like that works out so well, and it kind of makes you just really look inward on like yourself and like your relationships, and like hey, like what if you meet like an ex-lover down the road after many years of being apart? How have you both changed? So I feel like that's a very nice touch. This did land in my top 3 in the album ranking here. It is number 3. There's 2 other tracks, I mean, for those of you who can math, that overtake it, but yeah, overall fantastic opener, man.
Agreed, wholeheartedly agreed. And also got a little bit of airplay too. I think it landed in the top 40. I want to say it finished like number 31 on the charts.
Okay.
So again, I think the buying public was like, okay, yeah, I could dig this. I mean, granted, they were probably drowned out by the likes of the Carpenters and Elton John and disco and everything else at the time, but alas.
Actually, my first introduction to this track, Tangled Up in Blue, was through Rock Band.
Really?
Yeah, they had it. I think it was Rock Band 2 or 3. I played a lot of Rock Band with my high school friends, growing up. So, yeah, out of all the songs, like they chose this song.
It's funny you mentioned that because I've just recently played or started playing the Guitar Hero with my girlfriend Rachel.
Yeah.
And like this doesn't seem like a song that would be featured on any of those types of games. because the rock band Guitar Hero tracks are more stuff, like Sweet Child of Mine, or stuff from like Ozzy Osbourne, like Crazy Train. Like this seems like a more laid back, like just basic like folk rock tune.
Yeah.
And I don't see how that would pertain to a rock band playing game. But hey, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. So the next track is Simple Twist of Fate.
Simple Twist of Fate, and I'm just gonna come out and say it. This is in my top 3, and after a long, hard conversation with myself, I'm putting this at number 2.
Ooh, okay.
On here. For a long time, it was number 1. But this, if Tangled Up in Blue was a clue that Dylan's vocals had gotten better and he was marrying his folk era with his post-folk era, this confirms it. And his singing on this track is so lovely. It is gorgeous. The way that he ends every verse with, the way he sings it, it's just executed so perfectly. He's staying on tune. His voice is nuanced, but again, doesn't lose that passion. It's a very subtle track where it's basically just him, guitar with his guitar and harmonica, and I think there might be some bass in the back, but that's about it. It's just so good. And the lyrics too, I mean, they do kind of veer around the place, but at the same time, a lot of times we've talked about, particularly on like the Taylor Swift episode, or even to an extent the Jellyfish episode, where we've talked about lyrics that don't make a lick of sense, but if the tune's strong enough, it'll carry it. Whereas Dylan can kind of get away with that a little more because he's garnered that clout with his past work, where you're thinking, okay, if Dylan's saying this, it might mean something. One of the lines towards the very end of the song where he's, talking about going down to the docks with a parrot that talks, you might think of that at first. I was like, what the hell is he talking about? But I'm thinking maybe parrot that talks is maybe just sort of like a code for like wingman or something like that, because his main goal is to try to, get one of those nice ladies on the ship to, be his friend, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So I really, really, really like this track.
I absolutely agree. This track is phenomenal. It's not in my top 3.
Okay, that's fair.
I think at one point it was in my top 3. It's funny, like whenever I did my detailed listening of this album, like the first 3 tracks instantly landed in my top 3. Then, like, as I got in later into the album,
and it just got songs just kept getting punched out.
Yeah, I was just like, let's be real, Ryan. Let's be real. But you talk about like the feeling that Dylan has in this track here, and like the somberness of it. Like, the feeling I got was like it was almost kind of a lonely track. So, like, in the first track we get the story of like, hey, this is the arc of a relationship and how everything's evolved. This one is almost kind of like telling the story of like a one-night stand, and like how, the guy wakes up the next morning and the girl's already left. Mm-hmm. And like the lonely, like the almost like the at ease or like the early morning feeling that you get from like a night of passion like that, and the way that Dylan's able to construct a song that like really encapsulates that feeling, that works for me so well.
I wholeheartedly agree. And you talk about that morning after feeling. Yeah. I think that's reflected also in the key and sort of waking up feel that the song has, just based on the sort of the chords and the vibes that are brought. Yeah. I think, and to be fair, I think this is one of 3 or 4 songs, I want to say 3, that are basically in the same key, that definitely have this sort of, early sunrise feel, the just waking up feel, which I think is executed damn near perfectly. Yeah. Again, I have it at number 2. A long time it was number 1. We'll get to what number 1 is in a little bit.
Cool. And the only other thing that I'm going to mention about this track here, then we can move on to the next one, is like we talked about, like, the feel and like how the verses are constructed. I took note that the instrumental break that occurs between like verses 3 and 4 is purposely placed there because like you get essentially the introduction to the relationship, the one night stand, and like everyone parting ways. Mm-hmm. And then in verses 4, 5, and 6, you get the guy saying, oh, hey, yeah, I'm going to move on, whatever, I don't care. And then in verse 5, he tries to get her back. And then in verse 6, he wallows in misery. Like, what have I done? Like, I thought that was a really clever note there.
I hadn't thought about that. That's a very good point. And too, you mentioned how, again, it tells the story, especially when, he's talking in the last verse about, I thought she was my twin. She was born in the spring. I was born too late. Blame it on a simple twist of fate. Like, it hits. It hits. And honestly, like, again, like, I haven't even thought that far ahead about just how much this pans out, but you're pretty much dead on with the lyrical analysis here.
Side note, I'm proud that I'm not diving into the actual lyrics, like reading them verbatim, because I feel like if I do that in this kind of episode, we'll be here for 3 hours.
This is a good point. Very good point.
So moving on to the next track, which is You're a Big Girl Now. And again, like, we get a different kind of feel here that Dylan's bringing to the table. Like, the instrumentals, like, I took away from here, like, they almost sound kind of like islandy kind of vibes, which is a really interesting change up, because we've gotten pretty much, like, in the last track we got kind of like a bluesy, like, isolated folk rock, well, not rock, but like folk tune, yeah. And then the opening one is like pretty much folk head to toe, but it really does change up the album really well. And, like, the messaging and, like, the lyrical focus that Dylan has here is more about, like, oh, hey, like, more about, like, talking about an ex-lover and how, like, they've grown up, saying, like, hey, when I knew you when we first got together, you were a little younger, but now, like, you've grown into this quote-unquote big girl. I don't know why I phrased it like that, but, like, I did dig here on how in verses Dylan highlights certain sections by getting louder and singing "oh" to end that certain area. One example that I'm going to point out real quick is in the opening verse, he's saying, "It nearly swept my feet off of my, it nearly swept me off of my feet, and I'm back in the rain. Oh." Like, it was just an interesting thing that I noted, but yeah. Overall, like, I dig this song. It's not really stand-outish to me in terms of, like, potential to crack my top 3, but it works for me.
It works for me, too. Like, the first time I re-listened to this track for this review, I was surprised by it because, again, you mentioned the islandy vibes. I was getting more like a smooth R&B type thing. Like, this is something like maybe, Usher or Robin Thicke might be able to drop in on these days. But, I think this is a very solid track. It's definitely not in my top 3 either. But I do like the way that, again, Dylan saying it very nice, clear and concise. And the lyrics do paint this picture of, how... it's basically we're growing together and, we can make our own decisions, so why don't we? And again, I think he executes that very well. The harmonica solo at the end is, again, very unexpected, but very good.
Yeah.
And I don't think that gets talked about enough because Dylan's always been a solid harmonica player as far as, like, being tuneful, but here it stands out just as much as anything else because it just feels like, again, everything here is produced and engineered so well. And the band, too, should get their just desserts for, their performances on each and every single track on this album.
Yeah. One other thing I want to mention about this, and then we can move on to Idiot Wind, is, like, one, unless you have anything else to add,
no.
But, like... Gonna try not to really lean into the lyrics so much here, but, like, there's certain moments I'm gonna highlight because I feel like it's excellently written by Dylan. In verse 2, he's talking, singing about bird on the horizon, sitting on a fence. He's singing his own song for me at his own expense, and I'm just like that bird, singing just for you. I hope that you can hear me singing through these tears. Like, basically, this is Dylan saying, like, hey, I can change. I hope that you can take me back. And it's a very heartfelt song, and I really like that section there.
And again, you can feel the passion in Dylan's voice all throughout this track.
Absolutely. And, like, for me, like, I don't care if you... Well, I mean, through a certain extent, because I'm not going to ever say that... the one vocals that I'm most notoriously not a fan of on this show is Bruce Springsteen's.
Yeah.
And I'm never going to say he's impassionate, but, like, you know, if someone doesn't have, like, if Dylan wasn't bringing the passion here, I would be having a whole other discussion with this episode here.
Yeah, I think I will say, I mean, I don't mind Springsteen's voice as much as you do, but I will say it does feel like Dylan finds that balance better on this album than Springsteen did on Born to Run.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, like, that's not really a knock on Springsteen, I don't think, because we have to remind ourselves that even though Springsteen was aiming for perfection, that was only his third album out.
Yeah.
I think it was his third album out. Whereas for Dylan, you know, this is, you know, over a decade into his career, and, you know, you kind of almost expect someone who's been in the game that long to, you know, fine-tune everything to this point, and Dylan succeeds.
Yeah. And then even, like, talking about the lore of this album here, talking about, like, how this is basically coming around the time of his divorce from his first wife, Sara Dylan. He's living these songs.
Oh,
so, yeah. Next song is Idiot Wind.
Idiot Wind. And I'll say this at the start. If I ever piss anybody off this much, Lord help me, give me forgiveness, give me comfort, because I am running for my life. This might be the most brutal song that Dylan has ever recorded. I mean, you really don't have to, like, dig too deep into the lyrics like you've been saying. But there are moments, like you say, like in the third verse where he says, I haven't known peace and quiet for so long I can't remember what it's like. The way he sings that is maybe the most impassioned part of the entire album. And the chorus where he's saying, you know, idiot wind blowing every time you move your teeth, you're an idiot babe, it's a wonder that you still know how to breathe. Like, that is so brutal. And yet, because of the singing, because of the way that the song is constructed, Dylan's vocals are perfect. The little piano in the back works very well too. It's my favorite song on the album.
You want to know something?
What's that?
It's my favorite song off the album too.
Awesome.
Because, like, I think I struggled with it for maybe a little bit. I think I had, like, Tangled Up in Blue as my number one song at this point in the discussion. When I did the detailed listening. But the way that, like you literally just said, like, the lyrics here, they are so vicious. Like, I'm not going to, like, hamper on any more lyrics other than, like, you just simply look at the chorus. You're an idiot, babe. It's a wonder that you still know how to breathe. Like...
And what hurts even more is that he sings so tunefully, and we were just talking about how Springsteen really didn't have that medium and Dylan's found it. Like, this is the ultimate him finding that medium of, you know, singing so tunefully and so carefully and so, you know, precisely. Like, he wants this on record, and he wants it in the most tuneful way possible, and it comes across so strongly. And I also like how at the very end of the song, he sort of turns the knife in on himself, in a sense. Yeah. Not completely, but he reveals, like, you know, the other edge of this double-edged sword. Yeah. Basically saying, you know, why am I even wasting my time on you? Why have I wasted my time? Guess I'm an idiot too. We're idiots. And you're just like, whoa, you know? Even in his own self-reflection, it's, like, backhanded, you know? Like, he's just like, well, I guess I suck too, so be it. Such is life. And... yeah, just, again, like, he sings it so well. Everything's executed so perfectly. I really don't have anything else to add except it's just a fantastic, phenomenal song.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are listening to this episode right now, you've not listened to Idiot Wind, pause the pod, go listen to Idiot Wind just so you can know what we're talking about. Oh, yeah. Because it's an absolutely amazing song. So... you ready to go on to You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome when you go?
Let's go on.
So, I think this might be, with the exception maybe like one or other two more tracks off of the album here, this is the most simplistic kind of song. And I mean, like, I absolutely like dig what this song has to bring to the table. Apparently, like, some lore that surrounds this song is that apparently around the time of the end of Dylan's first marriage, it was his wife discovered that he was having a affair with the maid of the house, and this song is basically Dylan writing to the maid. So, overall, a very lighthearted kind of song. The instrumentation here is really good, and like I think for the first time here, like I hear that the bass is really pronounced here, not much else to say other than that. I mean, like there's some decent lyrics here, but nothing like too heartbreaking. I mean, it's a decent enough song.
I agree with that. I think this is the second of 3 songs or 3 or 4 songs that are in that sort of morning after type of vibe that we were talking about on Simple Twist of Fate, how the chords are very much similar and Dylan's vocals are sort of out there a little bit, sort of rising with the sun in a sense. And again, perfect subject matter for that because this is, dealing with the aftermath of an affair and Dylan realizing, hey, I really loved our time together, but I know damn well that there's no possible way I'm going to be able to get away with this. So, au revoir, Which, again, is not necessarily the most humanitarian subject matter for a song or a lifestyle, but at the same time, again, the way that everything is pronounced, you mentioned the bass. I thought the bass was just as pronounced on Simple Twist of Fate, and that's a very good thing. And again, it's a very simple song and a very solid song at that. So, great way to... And like you said, it's a little bit more lighthearted. I mean, granted, anything's lighthearted compared to Idiot Wind, but... I feel like this is the first of 3 songs in a row that sort of move away from the viciousness of Idiot Wind and really the sort of downheartedness of the first few tracks on the album.
And you kind of need that, man, because like coming up here relatively shortly, if I can remember the track listing and sequencing correctly, we're going to get a very, very dense song. And this is Dylan almost resetting the listener back into trying to capture their attention spans. So the next track is Meet Me in the Morning.
Meet Me in the Morning, and this is another track that's very much just sort of a... It's almost the most fun track on the album, and it's certainly very laid back in a sense. It's just a simple blues, and Dylan's usually good for one of these per album. Like I know he did Fourth Time Around, or obviously Five Believers, but just off Blonde on Blonde alone. Where he's just sort of laying back and letting the band do these things. Like the first few times I've listened to this song, for this episode. Well, the first time I listened to it, I'm thinking, I can almost feel like this being sort of like an Allman Brothers type tune. Where they could just, play the chorus and then just stretch out the solos to, God's Green Earth. Obviously, they don't do that here, and I'm kind of grateful for that. But at the same time, again, another solid track. I'd probably say... of all the tracks of the album, I don't think I have a least favorite. But this is definitely one where, every time, I get to maybe, the 2-minute mark of this track, my mind's somewhere else. And not to say that this is a bad track by any means, but at the same time, it does kind of, I hear the end of the track, it's like, oh, the track's over.
And I feel like that kind of plays into, the nature of the track itself, because it is essentially, Dylan really embracing that blues feel. There's not really much to it, man. I kind of agree with you. I think I might put You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome when you go, below this track in terms of, quote-unquote, least favorite tracks. But again, let me be perfectly clear. I don't have a least favorite track off of here.
Right.
Because I'm not an idiot. Well, never mind. That might be a bit slanderous, but Anywho, like, yeah, pretty straightforward track again. I actually didn't really have too many notes off of here. Like, I actually had to look up, like, a fun fact on this track here just to make me feel a little bit better about me talking about this here. And, the only time that this was performed live was in 2007. And guess who joined Dylan in this performance here?
Was it John Mayer?
No, it was Jack White.
Really?
Yep.
I figured it was a guitarist you liked. That's why you brought it up.
Yeah. Well, I could have. I think I left out a key detail because it was in Nashville, Tennessee. So yeah, not that John Mayer cannot exist in Nashville, but
Yeah, Jack White kind of lives there.
Yeah, he's the mayor there.
Like you could get a call from Dylan that morning, and be like, "Hey, you want to come and do this?" Like, yeah, sure.
All right. So going through two very, very simplistic tracks to the most dense track out of all the tracks in this album here, with Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts. So, and ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at my second favorite track off the album. Yeah. And it's mainly because just the story that Dylan tells so clearly here that just really has me on the hook. It speaks to his songwriting capabilities and his performance capabilities that he's able to hook me in for a 9-minute song.
Yeah.
And it's primarily just him rambling off like this whole story, and it's a really fun story. Like in terms of instrumentation, not going too much into the story here, I really dig how we brought in the Hammond organ here, and you almost get like you hear a banjo twang in the background, but I looked up the official instrumentation on the track on Wikipedia, which is maybe not the most reliable resource, but there's not a banjo listed in here, so it's just the effect that they were going for.
It sucks too because I actually have the. I was listening to my research for this album was primarily on the road, so I had the CD in my car, and I have the liner notes and everything in my car. I did not bring it in, so unfortunately, I'm just gonna have to go based on internet and memory.
Yeah.
But that being aside, I am right with you. This is my number 3 track on the album, behind Simple Twist of Fate and Idiot Wind, because my goodness, it's such a fun track too. Like, again, you can envision all the stuff that's going on, and you compare it to some of the older tracks that Dylan had in that same vein. Again, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking like Highway 61 Revisited, the track, not the album. Visions of Johanna, where, again, good lyrics, but at the same time, they definitely seem to feel a little bit, I wouldn't say forced at times, but a little nonsensical. Whereas everything here just hits time after time after time after time. Like, this track could inspire a mini-series. I'm not joking. Like, it really is so dense and full of, like, momentum that, the fact that you even crammed this into 9 minutes is almost impressive. Because, again, there's so much in there. And, again, it's also another track that veers on the side of fun, which, again, has been few and far between on this album. Because even with You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome When You Go, I know we talked about it being lighthearted, but that's still about an affair. It's still about a crumbling marriage. And Meet Me in the Morning almost feels a little too, hey, let's just, cut a track because, man, there's almost sort of a cynicism to it. No, this is executed, like, to perfection. And I love the bass on this track, just walking the whole time, boom, 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 boom. And again, I like you said, the organ, like, because at first I'm thinking, like, this could be played at, like, almost like a Ren Fair type of ordeal, because you envision the gallows being in Town Square. But at the same time, I'm like, would they have an organ back then in the middle of the street? I'm not so sure they would. But you could probably get away with playing it at Ren Fair, or maybe like a Tombstone type of Wild West type of atmosphere. It definitely invokes, people in tatters and, fancy clothes and carriages. Like, again, the vision on this song is so good. It would probably be number 2 if not for Simple Twist of Fate sounding so lovely as it is. But and what's funny too is I remember like liking this track and then going back into it thinking, this is a nice little fun track. I'll put listen, and not remembering that was 9 minutes long. I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, man, and like one other thing I'm going to mention, and then maybe we can talk about the story, the nuts and bolts a little bit here. But like I really loved how in every single verse, like you can really tell like towards the end of the like I almost want to say like halfway into verses, like it seems like Dylan's really digging into a really great flow, and that was just pure music to my ear holes. Like I absolutely loved it. So real quick nuts and bolts about the story here. All right, so we have the Jack of Hearts, who's the main character of the story. He's planning a heist, right?
Yeah.
And then Lily is just like kind of like showgirl, and she is in a relationship with the Jack of Hearts, but she's also in a relationship with this big Jim character, who is basically the scum of the earth. Who's like the big like Scrooge McDuck, like
like you just see like a 300-pound dude in suspenders and tattered pants and beer soaked all over his shirt.
Yeah. So, and plot twist, Big Jim is actually married to Rosemary, who is not having a good time.
No.
And so, they're going to this performance, right? And then, like, the Jack of Hearts, the main character meets up with Lily, and, somebody suspects something, and, Big Jim is just like, oh, what the hell's going on? And, Jack of Hearts slips out stage left, and he goes in there, and like the next thing you know, Big Jim is dead.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hinted that Rosemary kind of did it because she's the one who ultimately dies in the track here.
Yeah.
And then like all the while the Jack of Hearts made out with the money that he was looking for. So
right. And Lily just sitting there wondering what happened.
Yeah, Lily's just like, well, I guess that's what happens.
Yeah, just another crazy Saturday.
So yeah, excellent song. I absolutely love it. Glad I was able to dissect it and really dig into it, because next time I go back onto this album, this track here specifically, I'm like, I know what's going on. I can actually embrace what's happening here.
Right.
So the next track off the album is If You See Her, Say Hello.
If You See Her, Say Hello. And after 3 tracks, okay, scratch that, 2 tracks of fun lightheartedness with Meet Me in the Morning and Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts, we go back into the subject matter of dealing with relationship issues. And even then, like this track definitely feels like, it almost feels like if you're following the lore of this album, like this album's telling a story from front to back, which you probably shouldn't, but let's just say we are. Mm-hmm. This feels like Dylan returning like hard in that reality and just confronting everything head on.
Yeah.
And again, his singing's very impassioned. The lyrics, again, very much invoke a somberness that he's dealing with. And very much sort of feels like a darker version of Tangled Up in Blue, where, he's not going to see this person again. So, if somebody else just happens to, send them my regards because, I may not see them again, and so be it.
Yeah. This is probably the last track off the album here that is like on the simplistic, straightforward kind of standpoint for me. It kind of reminds me of the same feel that You're a Big Girl Now was kind of going for.
Yeah.
I mean, again, maybe the way I introduced my feelings about this track is maybe a little misconstrued and maybe short-sighted on my point, because I really do love how Dylan is emoting so well on this track here. The song's basically about him trying to pass on a message to his ex.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like him wallowing in his own misery. I mean, other than that, it's a really beautiful song that showcases Dylan to a T. Vivid lyrics, passionate vocals, and solid instrumentation. Not much else to say other than that.
Not really. Again, you can dissect the lyrics on your own, but Ryan pretty much hit the nail on the head. He's wallowing in self-pity, and he's just trying to make amends with, the situation that he's in. So, again, great track.
Before we move on to Shelter from the Storm, something I gotta mention is that for those of you who are like, why are you not talking about the lyrics? Why are you not talking about the lyrics? And, I'm like, again, we could spend 3 hours.
We really could.
Yeah. So
we could have spent 3 hours on the last track alone.
yeah. The next track is
Shelter from the Storm.
Yeah. And talk about a nice warm bowl of soup.
Yeah,
track.
A little bit.
That's the feel that I got from it, man. Here we get Dylan really just, again, reflecting on his relationship and everything, kind of how it began, how everything went wrong, and him walling in his misery, kind of really taking the best out of a lot of the previous tracks in terms of thematical elements, and really just all the while ending each verse with the phrase "come in," she said, "I'll give you shelter from the storm." That's almost I might be reading a little bit too much into it, but it almost makes you feel like he's losing his mind, because he might be just constantly thinking about how he first met this ex-lover, and how she provided such comfort to him. This song really does place you in the mindset of the subject of the song. Excellent song, in my opinion. It could have easily cracked my top 3 if it wasn't for just the craziness of Idiot Wind, the storytelling of Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts, and Tangled Up in Blue. This is a highlight off the album for me.
Yeah, this is honestly a song going into this album, I remember a little bit and thinking, this one's a little overrated, but after a couple of listens, I was like, no, this song's really good.
Yeah.
It's very much, it almost feels like the reverse of Simple Twist of Fate in a sense.
Yeah.
Because in Simple Twist of Fate, it's, two lovers meet and then she goes away. Whereas in here, it's more or less, I'm not sure if I love you, but I'm going to keep coming back again and again and again.
Yeah.
And he could be writing about Sara here. He could be writing about the maid. He could be writing about literally anybody, really.
Yeah.
But again, it's very easy to understand that he is talking about, him just dealing with the craziness of his life and, needing that someone to comfort him and, be able to listen to him, comprehend him, or at the very least just, give him a place where he can have more time to deal with that within himself.
Yeah. One section that I really did love here is when he's talking about newborn babies wailing and saying a mourning dove, and comparing an old man with broken teeth and how they don't know love, stranded without love, and then comparing the sorrow that both he's almost comparing himself to a newborn baby with how sad he is here. Excellent song, man. Excellent. So that being said, you ready to finish off the tracks here with Buckets of Rain?
Buckets of Rain is the final track on Blood on the Tracks. And I find it funny that you were talking about how If You See Her Say Hello was the last of the simplistic tracks on this album, because to me, I think this might be the most simplistic, or at the very least, it's up there, or down there, if you will, with it's the simplicity. I love how this track includes, or rather, how this album concludes with this track. It just feels like a very simple track, and it almost feels like, I love the acoustic guitars and how they're picked, particularly on the instrumental breakdowns.
Yeah.
The lyrics aren't too much to write home about, but at the same time, there is a little bit of depth in them, it seems. Especially when he's talking about how, he's sort of going into that backhanded compliment mode, where, he's talking about how, I love everything about you and how you make me crazy all the time. Just ugh.
Yeah.
Just you hear that, it just kind of bites oh, okay, somebody's feeling sassy today.
Yeah. A lot of your thoughts about this track is what I share, too. It is the perfect closer to this track here. I was thinking about this today. This might be a little bit of a stretch and maybe a little bit of a backhanded insult here. But follow me. Don't run away.
Okay. I'm here.
But the way that I thought about it is when we did the Torture Poets department and how the last track off of the studio release, not the double album or anything like that, from that experience was Clara Bow.
Mm-hmm.
And how that kind of felt like, Taylor was wrapping up her story and some of the things that she was going for by like comparing her to a famous actress, and like just the overall feel. Like I feel like this is it kind of does that, but 15 times better.
Yeah.
Because this track is basically talking about like, hey, this is life. And this is like, I've been strong, I've been weak. Friends will come, friends will go. If you need me, I'll be right here. And like, I really did love the lines where he's talking about buckets of rain, buckets of tears. Got all them buckets coming out of my ears. I feel like that really just really encapsulates the sorrow that Dylan's been going through throughout this whole experience here. But overall, fantastic way to wrap up such a great album.
Yeah, you bring up a good point because it definitely feels like he's, again, being very self-reflective on this final track and, again, just coming to terms with where he's at. And not only that, I think, and I've thought about this with a few other closing tracks off of other albums, particularly the first one that comes to mind is Formation off of Beyonce's Lemonade, where it feels like so simplistic and I wouldn't say his vocals are worse on this track, but they definitely seem a bit more singy than any of the other tracks on the album.
Yeah.
Or I feel like it almost feels like a sonic compromise to like fans who are like, ooh, I'm not sure if I was a fan of the new Down. Oh, okay, here's something I'm more familiar with.
Yeah.
Which, I can respect that kind of, compromise, even though sometimes it's just like, oh, you don't have to do that.
So, we did it.
We did it, man.
We found out who put this blood on the tracks.
Yes, and we found out what it was like to get tangled up in blue and get blown in the idiot wind.
So, I'll go first in terms of my rating and overall feelings about the album.
Go for it.
So, this was an absolute treat for me to dissect. Like, typically with like albums, like we go over like instrumentation and we get into like really, really long discussions. Even thinking about like our Pixies episode that we just recorded that we haven't released yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like we really kind of got lost in the weeds there a little bit. I feel like with the way that I just enjoyed this album, like, it's really like... The way that I want to equate it is just sitting down with somebody and them telling you the story about like their heartbreak and really getting into all the details about their life. And it's a really like fascinating story. Like I know not every single track off of here, like, Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts is not really about a heartbreak. But it's a story nonetheless. And this is what Dylan was going for and this is what he was known for. And overall, the storytelling and the passion that Dylan gives the listener is an absolute treat to enjoy. And this album is a classic for a reason. So I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10.
Ladies and gentlemen, for just the second time in the history of Hey, Listen to This, this album is getting a pair of 10s.
Woo!
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. And I was thinking, like, where on earth I could possibly nitpick, and I just could not find anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, I thought about this on the way down here as I was giving this album a third listen in the last 4 days or 5 days, which, spoiler alert, that should give it away right there. And I thought about it, I'm just thinking, if someone were to ask me, should I listen to this album? And I think about all the other albums we've talked about, like with Disintegration, I'll be like, yeah, but I just, and you may have to give a couple headers of time. Like, even For the First Time at Black Country New Load, I love that album. But I'm like, yeah, but just to warn you, there might be a couple things. Like, this one, no. No warning, just a solid yes. The instrumentation is perfect. The production is perfect. Dylan's vocals are probably the best he's ever had in his career. The lyrics are some of the best he's ever had in his career. And like you said, it's like a therapy session, but in a professional way. A professional musical way, I guess, would be the way to say it out. Because again, it is like just hearing someone, just sort of belt out their feelings and giving them the floor. And again, just everybody, like, the reason I'm glad you mentioned, like, not talking about the lyrics too much or getting, like, into the wholehearted experience, because this is just something that people need to experience. And I would put this in the trilogy of great Dylan albums. And like I said, that's a 10 out of 10 for me as well.
So, if you, listener, have experienced this album, and you're like, hey, I wonder where I should go next if I want to experience something like these guys would compare it to, it's going to be hard for me to compare such an amazing, like, experience, and I know I've recommended this album and this band several times before in the past, but like, it was the only thing that I can really think of when you're talking about, folk singer-songwriter talking about stories and has passion behind it. And that album is by Bright Eyes, and it's called I'm Wide Awake, It's Morning. I know I've recommended it several times throughout this podcast, but I will say, if you've not heard of that album, give yourself a treat. Dig into it, enjoy it, but most importantly, make sure that if you've not heard Blood on the Tracks, you enjoy that first, then go to Bright Eyes if you enjoy what you enjoyed with Blood on the Tracks. And
I will make mine a little simpler. I am going to recommend, I was originally going to recommend Highway 61 Revisited to sort of do the same thing I did with Torture Post Apartment, recommending 1989 and doing like a 10-year comparison. Mm-hmm. But instead I'm going to compare this album with the only other album I think can be on its level, just based on the world of Bob Dylan, and that is Blonde on Blonde. Man. I think they both set out to do the same thing, which is sort of encapsulate the sort of, folk, rock, country-ish sound within the confines of, whatever he's going through at the time. Whereas, and I think the major comparison difference is that with Blonde on Blonde, it feels like Dylan was talking a bit more about, he was still in that folky mode where he would just like occasionally throw lyrics at the wall and, see if they stuck. Where I think is with Blood on the Tracks, he definitely refined everything to a nice, concise manner. Mm-hmm. But it's still, I would say Blonde on Blonde is definitely the peer of this track, sound-wise, sonically-wise, and just great Dylan-wise. So it's Blonde on Blonde for me.
Dude, I missed the perfect opportunity to recommend a Dylan album. I do not know why I missed that opportunity.
I'm not sure why you didn't either, but that's, you know what? That's so be it.
Yeah, I'm not questioning myself now, though. So, we've come too far into this episode for me to pivot. Overall, with this being the only other, the second, both 10 out of 10, that both me and Matt have given in the history of this podcast here. It's highly recommend that you check that out.
Yeah.
And also, if you want to hear about the other 10 out of 10, Matt, what was the other 10 out of 10 that we both gave?
The other 10 out of 10 was also a 10-track album from the 70s called Blue by Joni Mitchell. Yeah. And that is also available on all of our streaming platforms.
So there you go, man. So check out that review after you get done, fully digesting this review, because I really enjoyed that review as well, man.
Yeah.
So speaking about reviews,
it's your turn. What you got?
All right, so we can do. Well, I'm going to present you with two options.
All right.
One option is going to be a hard pivot from what we just experienced. The other one is not going to be as hard of a pivot. But either way, I'm going to be here for a good time. So the way that I am going to have you choose between the two options here is I'm going to have you pick a name, okay?
Okay.
I actually don't know if the other option is the name, but I'm going to go with it anyway. All right, so we're going to go with Betty or Lua.
Betty or Lua?
Yeah.
Whew, that's a tough choice. I'm going to go with Betty.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pivot very hard with our next review here. So our next review is going to be from an album that was released in 2023.
Oh, jeez.
The artist is Hot Mulligan.
Oh, boy.
And the album is Why Would I Watch?
All right.
So this is going to be a hard pivot considering that we just talked about a very classic album. And now we're going to go into like a fun world, man.
Oh, yeah. We're going from the soft tenderness of Blood on the Tracks to whatever in God's name this is going to be.
So
let's do it.
So that being said, if you've gotten to this point in this episode and you're like, I've never experienced a Hot Mulligan before, second of all, phrasing.
Right. That sounds like an Urban Dictionary worst nightmare, whatever you just said.
But yeah, if you've not listened to Why Would I Watch, do yourself a favor, just so that you're familiar with it. Listen to it. It's a relatively short album in length. Looking it up right now on the good old Spotify's. 12 tracks, just over 37 minutes. So it flies by pretty quickly. Yeah. And ultimately, like I said, if you've not listened to Blood on the Tracks, somehow, after this review, like I hope both me and Matt have convinced you to listen to the album. Anything else you want to add about this album, this episode as a whole, before we send her out?
No, although I am... Goodness.
Are you looking at the...
I'm looking at Hot Mulligan on Urban Dictionary.
Yeah.
And at least the first definition is, hot new band. So at least they got that going.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to edit this out. The second definition is... And the third definition is when you've... We're not putting that in the episode. After that, I have nothing else to say about Mr. Bob Dylan or Blood on the Tracks. It's a 10 out of 10. I think we've established that.
All right, cool. So if you've gotten to this point of this episode and you like what you heard, and let's face it, after how long you've dug into this episode and you listen to me talk right now, you like what you hear. So the best way that you can reward yourself to get more stuff that you like is, you support me and Matt by on that podcasting platform of choice that you're listening to us on right now. Give us a positive rating. Follow us on that podcasting platform of choice. If you are on the YouTubes, like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop an emoji in the comment section of how you felt about the review. And social media links are going to be in the episode description. And also, if you want to write to us, Matt, how does a listener write to us?
They can contact us on our email by going to ttheylisten@gmail.com.
And for the last time in this review that is about Bob Dylan talking about Blood on the Tracks, I am the one, the only... I am not the Jack of Hearts, but I am Ryan James Kearns.
I might be the Jack of Hearts, but I am for sure Matthew James Durzik.
And I'm just going to remind everybody this simple fact, okay? I'm going to remind everybody that life is sad. Life is a bust. But, all that you really can do is just do what you must.
And I'm going to remind them of one other fact as well. Hot Mulligan is a band!